The queen knew that it might prove impossible to persuade Snow White to let her into the cottage a third time, so she plotted cunningly. She took a lovely apple, which had one green cheek and one rosy cheek. Then she put poison into the red cheek of the apple, leaving the green side free of poison. This time, she filled her basket with apples and disguised herself as a farmer's wife. For the third time, she made her way to the dwarf's cottage and knocked on the door. "I am forbidden to open the door to anyone," said Snow White. "I only want to get rid of these apples," replied the farmer's wife. "I dare not take one," replied Snow White, shaking her head. "Are you afraid that it's poisoned?" joked the farmer's wife. "Look, I'll cut it in two, and we shall each eat half." She held out the poison rosy half of the apple to Snow White and bit into the green half herself. When Snow White saw the woman happily eating one half of the apple, she took the rosy half of the apple and bit into it. No sooner had she done so than she fell down dead. The queen laughed a horrible laugh. When she returned to her palace, at long last her mirror said, "Thou, my queen, art the fairest of them all." The jealous queen was finally content. When the dwarfs returned home in the evening, there lay Snow White on the floor, no longer breathing. They unlaced her corset, combed her hair, and washed her face, and yet they could not revive her. The dwarfs were heartbroken. They knew they must bury their beloved Snow White, but they could not bear to do so. The dwarfs had a glass coffin made in order that they might still see Snow White. Then they each took it in turn to sit by the coffin, day and night. There Snow White lay, as if still alive but sleeping, with her skin as white as snow, her cheeks as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. Even the birds came and wept to see her lying so still. One day it happened that a prince found the glass coffin. He fell in love with the beautiful girl inside. "Let me have the coffin," he begged the dwarfs, "and I will give you whatever you ask." But they only answered, "We would not part with Snow White for all the gold in the world." "If you will give her to me," pleaded the prince, "I shall cherish her all my life." At length the dwarfs took pity on the prince and agreed to give him the coffin. As the prince's servants were carrying the coffin down the mountainside, they stumbled on the roots of a tree. The coffin was so badly jolted that the piece of apple which had stuck in Snow White's throat was flung out. She opened her eyes, lifted up the lid of the coffin, and sat up. The prince was overjoyed to see her alive. "Come with me to my father's palace, and we shall be married," he begged. Snow White agreed, for she had fallen in love with him instantly. She said goodbye to the dwarfs, who had loved her so dearly. Although they were sad to lose her, they knew that she would be happy. It happened that Snow White's stepmother was among those invited to Snow White's wedding. Dressed in her finery, she stood before her mirror and asked, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all?" The mirror replied, "The truth I must speak, and I vow that the young bride to thee is more lovely than thou." The angry queen felt that she must see this beauty. When she arrived at the feast and saw Snow White, her rage was so great that she fell down and died instantly. And Snow White and the prince lived in peace and happiness.